Yesterday was a breakthrough day in the Kyle Rittenhouse trial. If you've been following along the trial at all, you saw yesterday Rittenhouse himself took the stand, became very emotional. There was also a moment during the trial where the judge became emotional as well. Things just very tense in the courtroom. This, as the trial begins to wrap up, and the fate of Rittenhouse will be determined by jurors. If you haven't been following the case, this is the individual who crossed state lines at the age of 17 with a firearm during protest for Jacob Blake. He killed two people and injured another. I want you guys to take a look. These are just some of the highlights from the trial yesterday. Take a look.
And there were three people right there.
Take a deep breath, Kyle.
That's what I run.
I was astonished when you began your examination by commenting on the defendant's post-arrest silence. I have no idea why you would do something like that.
I have practiced before you, Your Honor. Your practice oftentimes is to reserve ruling on those until you see the evidence. If you want to yell at me, you can. My good faith feeling this morning after watching that testimony was you had left the door open a little bit, now we had something new, and I was going to probe it.
I don't believe you.
Just asked you, so you're a certified EMT, and you said yes, correct?
Yes.
That was a lie, correct?
I'm not an EMT.
There was no more danger. Why not go home at that point?
I was still helping people provide medical first aid.
But there's no one around that needs medical help at the 59th Street car source at that point. But you told the crowd he had a gun, didn't you?
That's what I said.
And that wasn't true. Mr. Rosenbaum never had a gun, right?
He didn't have a gun.
You just had shot someone, correct?
I did.
Why didn't you tell the truth?
I was being chased by a mob, and I don't really remember that interaction.
Gage Grosskreutz is a threat to you right now.
Yes.
He's got a pistol not aimed at you. You've got an AR-15 aimed at him. Why is he more of a threat to you?
I've been attacked by several people, and he decided to come and point a gun at my head. Well, first,
he hasn't done that yet.
He was moving at me with a gun in his hand.
So those are the highlight moments from the trial yesterday. And Ben, you know, the thing that I just keep coming back to, especially when Rittenhouse was crying, was that a real moment? Was that authentic, or was that something that was rehearsed and that his lawyer suggested he act out?
Even their acting is subpar, Georgia. Good morning. My 3-year-old does a better performance of feigning tears whenever he doesn't get his way than Kyle Rittenhouse did yesterday. That said, all that needs to have happened was his attempt to seem remorseful. And white supremacy has a magnificent way of washing away all of the sins. Take a look at Brett Kavanaugh, who likes to drink beer. The Supreme Court justice who used the fact that he likes to drink beer and all of his tears as his way to get to the Supreme Court. And once America saw those white men's tears, everyone was like, oh, and this is what we're faced with right now.
You know, the other side of this, Ben, you know, I was curious why his attorney even allowed him to go on the stand in the first place. I mean, for example, everybody watched the Derek Chauvin trial. Chauvin's attorney refused to allow him to get on that stand because you never know what's going to happen. And you never know exactly how jurors are going to receive you as the defendant, if they're going to believe you, if they're going to trust you. And what I'll say with Rittenhouse, he got on the stand there, and during cross-examination, he admitted on several different points that he had lied previously. Claims that he had made about being attacked, acting in self-defense, were not substantiated because at no time was there any physical contact, and there was no gun pointed at him until the third individual walked towards him. And at that point, he had already killed 2 people.
See, Georgia, this crowd likes to say that facts don't care about your feelings. This crowd doesn't care about facts. They more than happily reverse the order of what happened, disregard the timeline as presented in court. They will ignore that and still forward this narrative that poor Kyle Rittenhouse was being pursued by this rabid mob that came to harm him. And this is the narrative that the media is running with. And I also would suggest the fact that the media is taking Kyle Rittenhouse and using it completely to forget about the fact that the murderers of Ahmaud Arbery are on trial right now. So it's kind of a insult to injury, if you would.
Yeah, absolutely. And, simultaneously, while these 2 trials are going on here in Minnesota, we're preparing for the Kimberly Potter trial, which will have some updates about that a little bit later here on the clock. But, before we transition from the Rittenhouse trial, Ben, things are getting ready to wrap up. What do you think, given all of the testimony and evidence that's been presented, what do you think is going to happen in this case?
I think this white man is going to get off. So many times we saw, and it's going to be another justification. One thing that stood out to me, Georgia, is the prosecutor who's like all of a sudden like, I can't believe you, judge. Like, I do this all the time. This technique that the prosecutor did, that the judge made all of the fuss about, this was something that showed a light, that shines a light in the eyes of the prosecutors, that judge himself is not really there for justice. So I think we're going to have a dog and pony show. And I think that this man is going to get off. I hate to say it, but sometimes we have to prepare ourselves for what this justice system or this injustice system has done so many times before.
Yeah. And I mean, to your point, if the defense has done a sufficient job of showing that Rittenhouse was acting in self-defense, there is a high chance that he could get off. The other side is, even if he's found guilty, we have seen this judge show favor for the defense at the very beginning of the trial, when he said that the 2 individuals who were killed could not be referred to victims, but they could be referred to as protesters or rioters. And so even if Rittenhouse is found guilty, will he receive fair sentencing for killing 2 people and injuring another?
This judge is all but acting as a defense attorney. So I doubt anything seriously comes from this case. I think it is a dog and pony show for conservatives to remind themselves that they can still get away with murder.
Yeah. Well, I know you've been following some coverage this morning as well.
Yes. No. Also, we're taking a look at the 10 new subpoenas. Last night, a federal judge has rejected, for rather a different story here, the federal judge has rejected Donald Trump's play to block documents from being given to the January 6th committee. Now, this has already filed notice of an appeal, but it still has to go to a court order stopping the documents from going to Congress while the appeal is pending. Let's take a look at this first clip, and it's explaining it a lot better than I'm able to right now.
For the second straight day, the January 6th committee investigating the insurrection at the Capitol has issued a fresh batch of subpoenas. And some of the biggest names from former President Trump's inner circle are on the list. It includes the former White House press secretary, Kayleigh McEnany, and the former president's senior advisor, Stephen Miller. McEnany was reportedly with Mr. Trump as he watched the January 6th attack unfold on television. And congressional investigators say Miller played a key role in pushing state legislatures to overturn the election results.
The January 6th committee is zeroing in on Donald Trump's inner circle, issuing subpoenas today for close advisors who spent the most time with him in the White House, who saw and heard what he did right before and during the Capitol riot. John McEntee, who at just 29 years old became one of Trump's most powerful and fiercely loyal aides, and Molly Michael, his personal secretary, who sat right outside the Oval Office.
At least 35 subpoenas overall have been issued so far, but will any of the people testify?
Now, this is another example, Georgia. It really parallels the Rittenhouse case quite well, if you ask me, because we see the hubris and how far these people can get with a system of justice that we never get to experience as black people. These subpoenas are all but being ignored. And the question is how far and how long will they be able to ignore them? And I just can't think of many circumstances that many people other than the elite, the wealthy, the rich, the connected, the conservative, these Republicans, the president's inner circle, quite frankly, could get away with simply ignoring subpoenas from Congress.
You know, I just keep thinking about the caucasity of folks doing what they did on January 6th and contrasting that to Election Day, was it 2020? When you had 646 people arrested on a highway in Minneapolis. They didn't have transportation for 646 people. They didn't even have 646 handcuffs. But somehow they found a way on site to arrest 646 people to send a message that they were tired of the protesting that had been happening here for months after the murder of George Floyd, to send a message to protesters to not take the highway, and an intimidation tactic. And so if you could think of, city, state law enforcement working together to apprehend 646 people and issue tickets on site they had to come up with a system in that moment on how to process more than 600. It was the largest arrest that has ever happened in Minnesota. And how come that wasn't the strategy, the tactic, the approach to the insurrectionists? Why are we here months later trying to go through footage and identify people and subpoena people across multiple state lines and difference? Do you know how complicated this has become and how many different federal and state resources are being used to track these people down? And then not to mention, like you said, folks are ignoring their subpoenas. And so how much resources are we going to deploy into tracking people down and forcing them to show up in court? And and will they testify, right? How come they weren't arrested on site? How come citations weren't given out on January 6th?
Right. I think that is so critical, right? I think it's honestly because the system knows whose side it is on. When we cover these protests, we often see the police officers have their batons facing us and their backs facing white supremacy. Look at every protest, look at every interaction. The police always have their back to the Nazis and the white supremacists. I think that happens, Georgia, because they know whose side they are on. I think it's time for us to get to be familiar with that reality as well. Here's a second clip. Here's another breakdown from Rachel Maddow. I'm not really always, anyway, let's take a look at this clip as she breaks down the next part of it.
A federal judge tonight has just ruled on former President Donald Trump's attempt to try to keep documents from his time in the White House out of the hands of the investigation in Congress into the attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. Last month, Trump filed a lawsuit against the January 6th investigation, as well as the National Archives, which holds on to all presidential documents. The lawsuit aimed to prevent the National Archives from handing over Trump White House documents and records to the investigation. The suit argued that those documents were protected by executive privilege and they must be shielded from the investigators. In reality, the person who actually gets to assert that something is protected by executive privilege is not a former president, but the current president. And President Biden's White House counsel's office reviewed the documents in question and said, actually, no, these are not privileged documents at all. These can be given to the investigation. This federal judge has issued her ruling on that lawsuit, and she has summarily rejected Donald Trump's attempt to shield these documents from the January 6th investigation in Congress. Quote, the plaintiff does not acknowledge the deference owed to the incumbent president's judgment, meaning President Biden, who waived executive privilege on these documents. Quote, his position that he may override the express will of the executive branch appears to be premised on the notion that his executive power exists in perpetuity. But presidents are not kings, and plaintiff is not president. The court holds that the public interest lies in permitting the combined will of the legislative and executive branches to study the events that led to and occurred on January 6th, and to consider legislation to prevent such events from ever occurring again. This ruling says, in effect, that Trump's assertion of privilege is bogus and that there is a strong and legitimate public interest in these documents being given to the investigation. Trump has filed a notice that he intends to appeal this ruling to the D.C. Appeals Court, barring any movement on that. With this ruling from this judge tonight, all the documents that the investigation is seeking are now expected to be turned over to the January 6th investigation by the end of this week.
Now, we wanted to play as much as we did because there's so much context there that it was summarized very succinctly. Here's a critical thing. Donald Trump is trying to assert an executive privilege that he no longer has because he's not president of the United States. While this portion of the story is very, very important, I want everyone to focus on something else, though. If he's behaving like this out of power, consider the fact that they have a full mobilization to try to get him back in power in 2024. So let's consider what he would do if he ever got back in power.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a real question to ask. And, as I just reflect on January 6th altogether, Trump's role, what he's doing now, what it brings up for me, Ben, is there are two fundamentally different concepts of the criminal justice system. For people who participated in January 6th, who broke out windows at the Capitol, who stormed into the offices of people in Congress, who broke the law, they are still innocent until proven guilty. Mm-hmm. But for people who look like you and I, we are guilty until proven innocent. And so I keep coming back to that. Is just how different this is being handled because of the type of people who were involved and the type of people who broke the law. And so I am not surprised that their ringleader, while he is no longer in office, is still trying to make this system work for him. But I think he has gone beyond what even the craziest Republican, the craziest person on the right would ever go. And so a lot of people are not standing behind him anymore because they see just how dangerous he is and how far he's willing to go.
I'm afraid there's not enough of those. I think this is that's an important point. Where this Republican Party goes from here is so critical, but all indications from my best estimation, these people are just going to fall over and capitulate to Donald Trump because, well, he's the biggest bully in a room full of bullies.
I hope not. But you might be right, and the reson why I hope I'm wrong too.
I hope I'm wrong.
If Donald Trump is reelected, I really don't know what the future of our nation looks like. I don't know if we'll have a nation. I mean, at that point, would it be safe to say that we're moving in the place of having a dictatorship? Because what he has shown to us, he might get in there and try to change the law that a president can only serve 2 terms, but yeah, it's something to definitely think about.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. No, I was just going to say here's a more terrifying notion to me is the approval rating of the president right now and the vice president and the performance of the Congress, because all roads are leading to exactly that, Georgia. The performance of this Congress and the performance of the president it's abysmal when we consider the threat on the other side of it. And so we needed a White House that was getting stuff done, but instead we have a White House that is, still trying to appease, Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema, all while Donald Trump is lurking in the background, ready to seize that kind of power you're talking about.
Yeah, there's got to be some serious organizing that happens in order to counter the campaign that Trump is going to roll out. And I don't know who that person is. I definitely don't think that person is Joe Biden. Joe Biden has shown that he's, so conservative on issues that are important to the Black community, and he's not willing to go up against the status quo in a Democratic Party. So here we are. We do have some time to figure it out, but this is a serious question that we need to start asking ourselves because Trump did a lot of damage while he was in office.
That's right. And I think they're coming back to finish the job. And if we don't govern ourselves accordingly, if we don't carry ourselves accordingly and engage in rhetorical combat, political combat, these people are playing for keeps. They want the entirety of our democracy. And it's not overestimating it or overstating it, rather, to say that these people dream of what we have a nightmare of. That Handmaid's Tale, Margaret Atwood, that is their dream. And that's something that we're fighting against.
Who do you think would be a strong candidate to oppose him?
It just gets scarier. Donald Trump is over there on the right, they're lining up. You have Senator Tom Cotton, whose name itself is drenched with white supremacy and Jim Crow. You can't get more racist than Cotton as a last name, but his behavior suggests that he actually can get much more racist than his last name. And he's vying to be the next president. You have Josh Hawley, who thinks the boys are not manly enough. His thing is stop playing video games, boys, stop watching pornography and come out here and be a real man. So that's his particular flavor of fascism. So to be honest with you, everything to the right of Donald Trump is even more terrifying.
And do you think that there is, anyone, whether, Democrat, Republican, doesn't matter. Like, do you think there's anyone specifically who would make a good president?
Oh, George, you trying to get me? No, we're not. I'm not jumping down that rabbit hole this morning. Good morning. Not on the Democratic side of the equation. I would tell you this: we need a president that's actually going to get something done, right? Unapologetically. Yeah. And let me tell you, let's say it very clearly. He's got to get something done for Black people. So if Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, if they're not the people willing to get something done for Black people, then they're not the people who are ready to beat Donald Trump in 2024.
I thought you were going to say Nina Turner or, something of that such.
Well, yeah, that's why I'm not going to let you take me into all the fights. I got to choose my fights this morning.
What else are you watching? What presidential endorsement for 2024?
What are you watching in the news for this last story, Sister Ford?
Well, there has
you almost
been
got
progress.
me too. Yeah, you almost got me.
That I'm a journalist. I have to ask the good questions, right? So here in the Twin Cities, we're seeing some developments in the Dante Wright case, the trial of Kimberly Potter. She, was the judge, that is Judge Regina Chu. She had previously denied the motion for cameras to be in the courtroom, for the trial to be live streamed. And as we talked about earlier this week, Ben, there was a group of protesters over this past weekend who actually showed up to the judge's house and was protesting. And we rolled a clip of a previous judge, a retired white judge, elderly man, who called the protesters' actions stupid. And, that that disturbed me a bit because the progress that I have seen in the pursuit of justice here in St. Paul and Minneapolis has only come because protesters continue to show up and apply pressure. And it's even the case for Kimberly Potter's her charges. She originally was only charged with second-degree manslaughter, and protesters showed up at the home of the prosecutor and demanded that he increase the charges. Well, needless to say, she's now charged with first degree manslaughter, in addition to the second degree manslaughter. And after the protest, 2 days after the protest at the judge's home, guess what? The motion for cameras to be in the courtroom was approved. And so when you get this commentary of this man here, this is the former judge who you see on screen who called that protest stupid. What else do you expect people to do, especially when these efforts have proven to be effective?
That's right. That's right. They want to neutralize us by telling us what type of protest is acceptable. But if our protest is acceptable, it's not a protest. And so they try to psych us out. And while we were watching this and we were talking about this the other day, you mentioned how this media coverage itself was biased because they put up this retired white judge to give this perspective and nobody else. Right. Which itself is a manipulative technique by the media and the powerful to discourage protests, to say, no, nobody's out here. This is not the right way to do it. This is not but instead what we saw happen was the truth. When we speak up, when we use our voices and we put our boots on that pavement, we get results.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so the Kimberly Potter trial will be live streamed. We will be doing coverage around the trial. Again, this is the officer who says that she mistook her gun for her taser, that during a traffic stop with, at the time, 20-year-old Dante Wright, she was going to tase him, but accidentally had her gun and fatally shot him. So in this case, in this specific case, we'll be finding out whether or not jurors will buy into the defense that it was an honest mistake. It was accidental. But, this, I think, case was so significant because we were 3 weeks in to the Derek Chauvin trial. That's and right. Already everyone was on edge. There was so much tension at that time. I remember it very vividly because no one in the country thought that Derek Chauvin was going to be found guilty. And even if people did think he was going to be found guilty, absolutely nobody thought he was going to be found guilty on all charges. And so there was this suspense and anticipation of the verdict in that trial, which hadn't even wrapped up. There was one more week left in the trial when Dante Wright was killed. And so people were just on edge because some folks were terrified that if Derek Chauvin was found not guilty, the city was going to burn. And being here on the ground, there was military everywhere. There was a plan to deploy even more military for the verdict day in case it was not guilty. And so I remember that they actually fast-tracked their plans since they already had a plan in place. If things went wrong and Chauvin was found not guilty, they had, the military was activated already. And so instead of using those resources for a not guilty verdict, they ended up using those resources to respond to the protests, after the death of Dante Wright. And so it was a lot. There was a lot happening. People were out protesting for Dante Wright. People were still protesting the trial. And so here we are, 6 months later, and we'll find out what's going to happen to Kimberly Potter.
Georgia, that the way you described how that flowed from being resources, and by resources we mean like military resources, assets, tanks, basically, these are